Hello and good evening. My name is Kirill Gerstein, and you've tuned into Kirill Gerstein Invites, an online forum hosted by Kronberg Academy. We have the fortune of meeting here in this virtual space, and today I'm thrilled that the artist, activist, writer, filmmaker, an amazing human that wears so many different guises and activities that he undertakes. Ai Weiwei is joining us here today, and this is a virtual room, and your participation is absolutely vital. So your questions, comments are appreciated and solicited. And we'll talk with Ai Weiwei about a number of things, I imagine. Some of you may have read his recent memoir. If not, I highly recommend it. I've been engrossed in it and by it. And the title of this talk that we picked today, with a bit of a smile, is The Art of Being an Artist. And I think Weiwei is somebody that has been defining and redefining what it means being an artist. And I think there are lots of questions to learn and many things to ask him about. So first of all, welcome. Good evening.
Good evening.
I picked this opening film sequence because one of the two men that are playing chess, you probably know, and some of our viewers, but one of the men that's playing chess on a Parisian roof is Marcel Duchamp, and the other one, incidentally, being Man Ray. And music, close to my heart and many musicians here, is by Eric Satie, and this comes from the Dadaist film from 1924 called Entr'acte. You, in your book, cite that Marcel Duchamp was a very significant influence and a significant inspiration for you from your early days and from the early times you saw his art in New York, I believe, right?
First time when I encountered Duchamp's work is Philadelphia Museum, which has dedicated a whole room for Duchamp's collection. At that time, I know nothing about him. And the room looked very different, the objects in the room, large glass and all those things.
And so this is a wonderful point of exposure. So you knew nothing about him. You were a recent arrival to the United States. So what was your impression, or what was your feeling, or do you remember your thoughts when you first saw this work previously unknown to you by this artist?
I say those works are very rational work, I should say, but the rationality come from aliens or another species, which is not you cannot directly understand Duchamp without some intellectual background. So it certainly is not visually it's funny, but it's not within this kind of Western tradition of painting or sculpture.
And this intellectual context or background, this is something you added later to your understanding, or this was a clear realization for you, sort of from the first moment you saw it, that this was so alien logic?
Fortunately, I about a year later, I went to New York City, Parsons. In the Parsons School, I started to approach Jasper Johns' work, and I realized Duchamp is heavy influential of Jasper Johns and that generation. So I start to study what is really going on, and I realize Duchamp is a person that has this one person's revolution, and it liberates art from a vision, but rather mixed with poetry and language and puns, ideas. So that for me is very charming.
Indeed. In fact, so a tradition obviously is something, well, that's very important to all of us, and is in some way, well, I guess we could say, and you disagree, I know, if you feel so, but tradition is related to history, and history is something that is very much a thread through your book that traces the both the ongoing traditions and the breakage, sometimes very violent breakage of tradition. But what I wanted to ask you about and explore more is well, that relationship to tradition within art and to tradition in our histories and society.
I do feel as an artist, you have to understand the tradition. You have to have all knowledges about where we come from. But at the same time, to become an artist, or the day you announce yourself as an artist, that means you have to break away or break with the tradition. That means you have to give a new definition about what you're doing. So this is what how I feel. Otherwise you couldn't become you, or you couldn't become a person who is relevant to art history or art tradition. If we look at art, all those important works, all the works would affect us. So all made by individuals who have the notion and have a great understanding and knowledge about tradition and skills, but at the same time made a breakthrough. They gave a new definition.
Of course, though, it would seem that, could we agree that it seems there are artists, and there's some, I think, great artists in both veins. There are some artists that prefer to build on top of traditions, on the shoulders or the stones laid by their predecessors, and then there are others that prefer to come with a more violent breakage or denial or denunciation of tradition. And it seems that there are great artists on both sides. Would you find that? Or do you find that...
I do agree. For in the past, we see sometimes 200-300 years without major scientific or major development in human thinking. And there's a lot of super highly intelligent thinker and craftsman. They're just keep working on the same notion, but trying to make it better. And there's a lot of artists. Most artists are doing something like that. But for me, the one I'm interested in is someone made a big breakthrough who reflects the time, the difference, and to be honest about the time being. because especially after so-called contemporary or modern art, where we are living in an age which changes become a common notion of everyday life. Every day we are seeing scientifically so much breakthrough and so much challenge of modern life. Not just it's not what we are willing to, but it's just the sense of time and the location and the ideas about those time and location are changed so fast, and that challenges the artist, who is the one who are sensitively trying to monitor and trying to keep the same, to study the pulse of our time. So the theory of the kind of notion I said, to redefine yourself with the time, for me is very crucial for contemporary artists. I'm not talking about medieval time or Renaissance time.
So you feel that this has in some way, this breakage from tradition, you feel is something that accelerates in our time due to the acceleration that we feel generally of societal changes, technological changes?
Not necessarily to call it as a breakaway from the past, but rather to rephrase or give a new definition, because we are repeating the same language, but we always give a new interpretation and definition to it. So this is what we do.
And how do you feel, again, I think there are at least a couple diverging schools of thought. There will be artists and people working with the aesthetics of art and philosophy of art that would say an artwork has to stand on its own and be appreciable on its own. There will be others that say it's very much contextual, and some people will say it's completely contextual, the art. And as you've just said, that we give interpretation or new interpretation to existent phenomena or objects. Where do you yourself feel rather on the abstract side, or as I would possibly guess that it is very contextual?
Sorry, there's phone calling in, so I don't know how to handle it, but I just dialed off.
I'm glad you're back.
Yeah, I will be back.
Yes, and, very good.
So I understand
if you heard me, but basically,
yeah, I heard you very well. You very well. I think it's a matter of taste, and it's a matter of what can make you excited. It's like about love. People like very smooth, quiet, or can be very sensitive, or someone seeking to ask the ultimate question, what love is about. It can be more philosophical and can be more, deadly questions. So there's no clear answer about it. And for me personally, I think I have a curiosity, and I always want to push myself to some extreme challenge. And also I know doesn't matter how extreme, you cannot go that far. You just one individual with the knowledge you have and the skill you have. So, but I enjoy that part, to challenge our human state of mind and to see how art would work with philosophy and with today's challenge, politically, socially, because I don't want my art to be apart from it, to enjoy just by myself. Art for me is not just about expression, but also about communication. And to communicate, that means you have to understand what is in others, what others care about, how that can set up a successful communication. So that requires different skill.
Absolutely, and you certainly. I mean, what is I think very admirable also throughout your book that you have that you live for the vision and the version of art that you believe in, and you've suffered for your vision of what being an artist is. And I think this makes us. It's a good point to turn back to. A little bit of the early personal history. I was struck by the early chapters of your book, by obviously the adverse, difficult is an understatement, conditions of life that you and your father and siblings experienced, or were subjected to rather. But you write yourself that this gave you an incredible feeling of independence, this feeling of being an outsider, and I think if one looks at most great artists, in one way or another, they were outsiders. Could you talk more about this feeling of yours, of being that outsider, yet having this tremendous impulse to an urge to communicate?
Very often, if I talk about that, if my son is next to me, he said he have to be repeatedly hear something like that. For him, it must be very boring. But he's in the other room, I locked the door, so I can feel a little bit comfortable. But yes, I've been through something, I would say it's almost like not real. If you live in a hole for 5 years with your father, and your father as enemy of the whole state, clean up the public toilets. And so this, nothing can use language to express how you live through the time. But still, that is not necessary. And then, it's very unique situation, and then not necessarily even can help me in any way. So I don't want to make it become like a mystical thing, but it was a reality, and it was harsh. But think about many people who in much harsh condition today, living in many parts of the world, and they would never have a chance to become artist or even notable artist, to even have to have a chance to have their own language and to communicate. So after all, I think for me, I have to think what I experienced is a human condition. It's not just unfair or not an injustice, but rather a common human condition. And it happened, I'm the one experienced it. And there's many experienced it, will never have a skill to become a musician or artist, or even have a chance to give a clear language about the condition.
Yes, absolutely. And it's my question, of course, in this setting, it can, on Zoom, in a relative and very posh comfort of Western life, this is not meant to trivialize the human condition and the parts of it that you experienced. I was struck by your one quote that I highlighted in the book. Every time we were ostracized and rejected, my perspective on society shifted, you write. And then later you say, in fact, on the same page, the estrangement and hostility that we encountered from the people around us instilled in me a clear awareness of who I was, and it shaped my judgment about how social positions are defined. That part fascinated me, that, you know, what your reaction, you as Weiwei, of how it helped formulate and shape this independence of mind that you have. So that's just to excuse or explain myself. That's what my question was related to, not just so to make a regular interview about how hard it was to live, which obviously it was. But in my mind, it seems that this independence of mind and judgment is something quite necessary for an artistic pursuit. Obviously, if you have the other talents and skills that are necessary to be an artist, no?
I do think so, but how do you define independence-ness? That means you have to really accept loneliness or hardship as a gift to you. Otherwise, you can never really establish the so-called independence. So, and very often you did it like I did it without much conscious. I was for a long time. I would never think I would become Ai Weiwei today. You know, I just trying to survive and trying to find a job I can do, and trying to not to lose my stubbornness and my simple belief what I don't like. You know, I can see many people doing the same thing all their life, but never had a chance like what I did. Maybe because certain location, because certain background, and it's very much because chance. The life has a lot of chances. It's not necessarily, even if I repeat what I did, I can never even be called as a successful person. And even today, I always want to be conscious whatever happened is some kind of illusion, and you know it doesn't matter. It's still some kind of illusion, because you always have a human condition as a larger reality, and once you are keep thinking about humanity and where we come from and what is the situation today and where we are going, and your personal ego and the whatever happens experience there, of course it's you don't have a second reality, but still you're questioning what you have is something necessary.
Absolutely. We have excellent questions, and I'll start weaving them into our conversations. There is a Haiyu Wang who says, "Good evening, Mr. Ai. I'm a Chinese studying overseas. I'm currently studying modern art creation. Your work has had a great influence on my research, and I would like to ask you a few questions." And there are 3 questions here, but I'll start perhaps in the opposite order. The question number 3 from Haiyu Wang is, do you have any views on decomposition and reconstruction in your work? Thank you very much.
This is quite technical words, but well, I think there's so many ways to structure a form, and of course we always have to thinking to standing on the opposite of our own position and examine our ideas or concept from different angles. So I don't know, you call it decomposition or I don't know if I answers your question, but this is to be to have a critical mind and also to be very self-critical. Is most crucial for any intellectual or artist.
Yes, I would agree with you. There's a question from Aida Lalu that asks, can you please expand a little on the difference between expression and communication, something they just mentioned some minutes ago. What does it mean for you? When do you know that you're communicating as opposed to merely expressing?
Actually, you don't really know, but that's why this still very attractive when you hear people still care about what you're talking about or make an argument. You know, I'm the one loves argument, and that means your expression have a solid ground because argument. And I could never find a better argument when I was in China, and until I no longer can communicate because I completely been deleted. And even I still can express myself, but that has no difference with almost like not express yourself because simply you cannot communicate. And you know, all those ideas about aesthetic or philosophy is so, I would say, it's quite simple, except when there's a challenge and when there's a questioning.
Yes, absolutely true. It's there are moments when these things are put put to a test, and one's convictions and beliefs are put to a test. In fact, your web address has a quote from you saying, expressing oneself is a part of being human. To be deprived of a voice is to be told you're not a participant in society, and ultimately it is a denial of humanity, is what you write. And these are strong words. There is also a question from Jan Kemp, who says, I'm a New Zealand-born poet, now a long-time Kronberg resident. In the mid-80s, I lived in Hong Kong, teaching English and creative writing at the Hong Kong University. Some of my then students might now have children who are young artists, young protesters standing up for the democratic movement there. But what chance have they to become independent? I would say none, says Mr. Camp. Someone once said the Peking government sees only the mass, not the individual. What would you advise them to do today? Emigrate, keep fighting, greetings to you. And sorry, it is Miss Camp, because she just corrected me that she says, I'm a woman. I apologize for that, but the question stands, what would you advise them to do today? Immigrate or keep fighting? Greetings to you, says she.
Well, I would say a difficult situation would not make you, it would be difficult for communication and expression, but still there's necessity for argument. And without that kind of argument, I think we lost a very essential meaning of life. So I would never say just migrants, unless you think that location sophisticate you and make you has no chance to continue your artistic life or struggle. But I would always think to live in any condition, you can become right and to become yeah, very often it's necessary to live in the difficult situation. So that's my advice.
Indeed, and there I wanted to ask you, perhaps, so many of us here, I think, well, let's not say many of us are artists here, but we all engage in artistic pursuits. And I, for example, as a musician in the classical Western tradition, which involves interpreting or reinterpreting works by others, I think we all ask ourselves the question, what can we do and how much can we do? And I think there are some very interesting differences emerge between, possibly between the arts, but maybe you'll say that's not necessarily the case. But I guess this is a very big question, but begs to be asked, what can an artist, in your opinion, do to influence the society, to influence the betterment of the society, whatever we think that may be? Or is art a relatively powerless thing?
I do think this is a complicated question, but the question comes back.
That's why I asked.
No. But it comes back because it's uncomplicated because you only have one life. It's asking, challenge yourself what you want your life to be. You know, you have the whole world and you have one heart is bumping there quietly. It can be 30 years, can be 60 years or 80 years. And it must have some meaning in there to support you to be yourself and do whatever you think you can. And they always encourage it. And don't be afraid to try to influence anybody or to create something meaningful, but rather to find out who you are and rather to live a full life and not to regret when you're leaving the end of your life to think, oh, I have the chance, I never really tried. So everybody has a chance to become yourself. Don't think you already have yourself, but rather to become yourself. And so you always have to standing out of your body. This body doesn't really, it's just like a borrowed or rented to you. And your spirit can be so free and can be so brave, and there's no border and nobody, no doctrine can tell you what you should do. This is no such a world called the musician world or art world or politician. This is those categories simply doesn't exist except we are human beings, individuals, and we reflect humanity. And that is very rewarding already.
And your sense of becoming is continuing, and you continue to undergo this sensation of change, would you say?
I would say, if you have any sense of a long journey or climbing a mountain, you can be so tired, and of course you can. Anytime you can go give up. Also, you can going down. It's much comfortable, but still you want trying to make another step to see if you can make it, and but still there's no purpose. What are you trying to make? It's just some kind of call there to say, okay, I want to go to a place nobody have been there. And that is not for your self-ego, but rather to expand our human knowledge about who we are.
We have some philosophers in our audience, and one of them is Paul Boghossian from NYU, who asks, what is the role of the aesthetic in an artwork that also has a political or moral message? What would you answer?
Well, I think aesthetic always is belong to moral and philosophical. It cannot be separated. You know, there's no such aesthetic as abstract aesthetic. Since human is always political, as animal, we become political as long as we had a consciousness. And we can recognize we are human, and we have families, society, friends, and the purpose of life. So I don't see where this question really from.
So you would argue that there are no works of art that are non-political or non-moral.
I think
or that don't contain a political and or moral.
I can also put the other way to say his work is non-political very often is very political statement, and to say non-moral is immoral judgment.
Even though, of course, we get into into the territory of music, for example, that is so good at so abstract meanings. And I think so Stravinsky, for example, to take somebody from the 20th century, I don't quote exactly, but approximately says that that a work of art is only expressing itself and nothing else. So do we interpret that as a political and moral statement as well?
I would say that is a strong statement, but I would not take it as the surface value as a non-political. Otherwise, we as human, we don't understand the birds also make music, and any animals or trees, they make their music. And of course, they have no consciousness maybe, so they will not even call it as music. So once you have a logic, you have rationality, you structure assumption there, which you understand that structure and that movement is different from another one, that takes a strong judgment. And that judgment, I think, is very related to moral, philosophic, and the political situation.
Mm-hmm. An abstract experiment, if you, and it's an experiment that's abstract in our case, but perhaps not always abstract. If you had no knowledge and thought that there'd be no chance that somebody would see your artwork, so it would be just between you and whatever you may or may not create, do you think you would pursue making an art object if you knew nobody would be on the receiving side of your communication?
Well, this is really come to value judgment. I think there's a symphony or there's a piano concerto, and all can be very sophisticated and complicated, requires great knowledge and skills. But sometimes art, if we talk about art, they can be a single string or a one sound after another. It can be a human's voice. It can be equally as a high aesthetic meaning. So when we talk about those instruments, even when it was born, it comes from a society who can appreciate and who has been trained to appreciate this kind of logic and rationality. So without argument, all our taste is being trained.
But nevertheless, just a question: if one had no hope of an audience, a reader, a listener, a viewer, does one still do art as sort of one's own basic human function?
I think art also functions as a healing process. I see people who has mental problems in the mental hospital or people in jail. They have been doing so-called the most shocking, beautiful works we can appreciate. So they has no audience, they have no market, and not even one person would appreciate their work, but still that healing functioning and makes them feel the mind become at ease, comfortable. They can talk to themselves and realize what they created is another reality, like a mirror to reflect their mind, which is it can be appreciable or charming. So we are talking about art in different levels. But if you talk about the work hanging in modern art museum, then it's so arrogant, but at the same time, you don't know the price behind it is millions and millions. Then you have to question it. You have to say this is very immoral. This is sad. This is hypocritic. Because it really destroys the meaning of how art functioning.
Yeah, no, that I absolutely agree with you. But, I think of examples, for example, Franz Schubert writing in early 19th century in Vienna, a larger percentage of his works were not given a hearing until much after he had passed away. So there were premieres of Schubert's works throughout the 19th century in Vienna, whereas he wrote these often without any reasonable hope that they would be heard, nor that they would necessarily survive, which I find is very moving. And in some way, I thought when you write about your father, in some of the more desperate moments and years when he would write, but also virtually possibly not having a hope that this would be published or read or would reach his readers, which I find is very touching.
Well, my father wrote his first poems when he was in jail. So the Serpent certainly is just expression, and he never can dream he become a well-known poet later. So, but we can say there's many artists or poet who writes beautifully, but never set up a successful communication. Maybe not even have a chance. So in that sense, we're talking about a different sense. The one who has been, successfully reach its listener or readers, or the one who can be much better but never successfully reach another, to across that river. So
you said just a couple minutes ago about some work of art hanging on the walls of MoMA or any other modern museum, or we see in auction things and objects that are called or deemed or sometimes pretend to be art, command astronomical prices, which is perhaps yet another discussion and yet another question. But I want to talk about skill. Obviously, for example, playing the piano, playing an instrument, or let's say classical dance, to use a non-musical example, requires a tremendous amount of skill and training that's presupposed as part of one being an artist. I think in graphic arts, in painting and sculpture, in the earlier times, again, there was this presupposition of the incredibly high level of skill that went with being an artist. Now, I'm sure both you and I and everybody in attendance sees some people that will say they are artists and without seemingly much skill, we'll put together two objects and say, well, this symbolizes, capitalist oppression. Help me understand, help me distinguish between this so traditional art with the implication of the skills involved and the conceptual art that I think sometimes seems to be much more willful in its definition of what being an artist and what being an artwork is.
Traditionally, we think art is it's really very much related to craftsmanship skill, and but still, if we think about the classic masters, there's also skill of the mind and the thinking. It's always combined. There's a lot of skillful craftsmen, but they are super skillful. You can really admire their skill, and maybe you can never really challenge those skills sometimes, because it takes a lifetime and it takes this unthinkable body, mind, all those all work together, and it doesn't really, you cannot even separate it. So then we always think only the skill cannot make a master. A master has to have strong emotions, strong human understanding, and the self-interpretation of the language. That's so important. And then you see a human behind the skill, the treatment. And I think that is what artists or musicians would value, how to equip himself, the skill at the same time to reflect his, to not to have too much skill overpowering his mind. Same as a good writer, it's not because you use language beautifully, but rather to use it just right, not too much.
Yes, that's an interesting view. I'm sorry, there was a small technical problem. So because my Zoom program relaunched, so some of the questions were now not archived, but I do remember the next question I was going to pass on to you. I think it was from Pumin, if I'm not mistaken. And the question was, to paraphrase that, do you think that negative pressure and difficulties were so a key feature on artistic development? And as an example, the person asking the question said that some artists, when they achieved success, actually the quality of their work or their creative impulse seemed to recede And the question finished with asking, do you worry about being successful in that sense?
Well, I'm very humble about this so-called successful. I'm far from being successful, and I've been giving much opportunities than I deserve, but I don't think I'm successful at all. And yeah, it still have difficulty to hear.
No, I hear you very well. Yeah, no, I hear you very well.
Okay, so yes, many, it depends, it's really like a journey. Depends how long you want to run, I want to run a little bit longer than my life can give to me, so I can never be successful.
Gianni from Berlin asks, I'm a student from Berlin and making a presentation about your work, especially on the topic Ai Weiwei, political art or art with political speech. Which of these two would you describe your art, and which work of yours do you think is your most political?
Most political. I very often I don't talk about my individual works. A all has its own reasoning, but still I try to find out life itself. I've been in different kind of life conditions, meet different kind of challenge. Some challenge forced to me by society. Some challenge simply I gave to myself. So in that sense, I see myself as someone who is often in the condition of being confused, and still really not with a very clear mind. I can make a simple argument clearly, but still I'm still very confused person. So
that's I think a very good and creative state to be in. I think when things are too clear, this is already a very uncreative moment, possibly. There was an earlier question, and people have kindly reposted their questions, which I'm very grateful for. Mimi from Paris says, good evening. Classical music is a very established art form and has more recently become a major space for investment for the Chinese government, with numerous concert halls and tens of millions of music students being schooled. Should there, in your opinion, be more activism and thought leadership from performers and composers in this art form across the world today? Happy New Year from Paris.
I think art and music takes their own reason. You can see there's an intention for China become rich and powerful. They want to share same kind of language or same kind of platforms, and I think it's an effort there. And but I still would challenge without clearly freedom of speech, what can come out, and what can come out meaningfully with this kind of promotion. And I think art is a dangerous game. It requires imagination and courage, and both the Chinese state cannot take it. It's not possible. So when you have a group of very highly technical musicians, but lacking of imagination and courage, and I don't know. I really like to say in 30 years what is going to happen.
And what is your interpretation of this surge of interest in, let's take as one example, Western classical music, but in your book you talk about also the interest in the early years when you came back to China, that you saw as China started to open up and more so Western visitors, and the taking note of the developing art scene. What is your interpretation of this rush towards this Western art tradition? But for example, in classical music, because China has obviously its own very, very deep traditions, including its own classical music, and obviously very deep-rooted ancient art traditions.
I think we are living in a world where, is fragmental. It's completely broken. So basically, our value system or ideology and our language, which carries our daily emotions and our aesthetic judgment, completely broken. So you can see there's a tendency or some kind of trend, but there's no meaningful act, because when you refuse your own memory and your past, you destroy what the whole notion of human development, and you come to a place in the history which is only left is loneliness, and this whichever directions you're going has no meaning. So that is a true danger in the development if we are negative about our own memory and refuse to understand our past. And China is under that condition. And this is we never really had a moment like this in human history, completely trying to be just practical, trying to gain the profit or to be benefited by the capital competition, but to sacrifice everything, include our own memory.
Yes, this memory and denial of memory is of course so perilous, and seems to take away something very human from our human experience and human condition. You had an incredible project where you assembled together with your team a list of the casualties, particularly child casualties from the earthquake, and names of the school children. And so this is an important, crucial contribution to memory. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the events, as you're a very keen observer. You, of course, now have seen that in Russia, this memorial, the group that was assembling and naming the victims of the Stalinist camps and oppression, that it's been shut down by the recent ruling. what is your observation of the situation? Because I ask not only because of this particular instance, though it's a striking one, but generally this is obviously a symptomatic occurrence currently.
I'm not very clear about what happens in Russia, but I know the character of the powerful, not necessarily only Russian or China or North Korea, but to try to change the facts, simple facts, not even argument, just the facts itself. And they are most advanced in doing that to cover up, to not let certain facts to be known. And then you would ask a question, why the powerful state or powerful individual would scared of those facts, not necessarily even they made mistake about those facts. It could be someone like Stalin or Mao Zedong did a long time ago, but still today people make such effort relentlessly trying to dismiss those questions. So there must be showing something the facts are powerful than they are existent. The facts give a stronger argument about all their propaganda.
But these facts, I think we have seen that also in the American elections recently, but we see it every day in the news, in the media, in the social media, that the very nature of facts is becoming increasingly hard, I would say, to process, because there is this cognitive overload of information that's thrown at anybody willing to consume it. And in some way, we're all consumers of information. And so I think we're now getting to a place where it's not only about hiding the facts, but that the whole idea of fact and truth can be so rapidly diluted that we're completely confused and lost. And how do you, what are your recommendations in that?
I do agree. I think not only in those authoritarian states, but the so-called democracy and the free society, today we are so overdrawn by the information and simply we are still dominated by certain ideology, and those are really have the best interest of the mostly cooperative interests, because they are bigger than nation. They last much longer. Many corporate can last 100 years or more, a few hundred years. So today we are facing very difficult situation, because individuals are no longer just being restricted by political situation or border, but rather by unseen or the situation cannot even to be clear, what is affecting our thinking and our society moving to. So I think it shows a bigger potential of the danger of today's society at any moment, because before it's very clear, your regional problem, or you have a border ideology or religious belief. But today, all those are under highest profit thinking and the financial institutions who is not very clear, and we all somehow affected and dominated, our culture being dominated by those powerful forces.
Yes, and I think, even as I grew up, obviously quite at the very end of the Soviet Union, but we often had a saying that, well, it's this kind of thing, whatever one could be exasperated or disagreeing with, this kind of thing only happens here. But as you have just said, there are many things that now happen that are very clear, I think, to all of us, that they're rather symptomatic generally in society. They're not only happening in societies with less freedom or totalitarian societies or societies under dictatorship, but in fact, they're happening in so-called democracies. So this is a general human problem, it would seem.
I think whenever there's a dominant power, there's always this total corruption and a total darkness, and that would always be being dangerous to humanity.
But what are our alternatives? Because obviously, so many utopias have failed or did not materialize or turned out to be dystopias. And as that cynical phrase goes, that capitalism is the worst system, but it's the best one we have. I'm not saying I subscribe to that, but what are the alternatives?
Well, alternatives are more or less like as an individual, you have to have consciousness. That means that's already very difficult with today's condition. Then that consciousness bring you a right judgment of how to celebrate humanity in the way you think it should be. That's extremely difficult to take any kind of action. So, and then just trying to be well and not to cause diseases or accident, and to live a more relatively peaceful life, because this peace is not necessary, it's really given, and we are very how do you say, privileged to have such a long peace, but still the peaceful life can be a rotten life, and so we have to be conscious about that.
There was a question from Marc-Antoine Hamé, who asks, on censorship, what does Mr. Wei think about his works that can be seen in the M+ Museum recently opened in Hong Kong, and the one that is not visible? I'm referring to his pointed middle finger type of photographs that were widely exhibited. I saw them here in Paris. In M+, one can see the one in front of the White House, one can see the one in front of the Parliament, but not the one done in China. You can check that on the M+ website. Thank you, says Marc-Antoine.
Well, M+ Museum is part of the Hong Kong's culture facility, and Hong Kong is part of China's territory. So there's almost no argument. And but when we talk about censorship, we often talk about China or Russia or maybe Iran or somewhere. But still, there's a heavy censorship in the West. It happens, many of my films cannot be accepted by the major film institutions. My film about Wuhan, about Hong Kong, those cannot be accepted only because they need the business, and the market, film market, is from China. So nobody can afford to lose that business. So censorship is not necessarily ideology difference, but rather to about how to survive. You see all those sportsmen, or all those big brands, can they really challenge China, or can they really say anything about their individual feelings? Then they would apologize. They will kneel down to that. So do not be to being enough to think censorship is only happens in China. Censorship is about the power. It's about how to survive under this strong power and culture. And the capitalism itself trains people in education and in mainstream media. And that kind of censorship is always very shocking about what to say and what not to say, because that would make you lose your friends, lose your career, and you would never really have a chance to make it. You know, people are trained by those kind of shit. I'm sorry to say that, but it's obvious in our daily life. So just point a finger to Korea or North Korea and China certainly is kind of naive.
No, absolutely. Of course, there's much censorship of many kinds and much self-censorship, and I think the sensitive issue that pops up in a lot of discussions in Western culture now is the term cancel culture, and I wonder where you stand on that, because obviously now also, particularly with the availability of social media, there are these periodic storms that rise on the use of this or that example or this term by a certain, usually prominent figure, and then there's talk and discussion of cancel culture on both sides, those that have been, so to say, canceled, those that are canceling. What do you think about this emergent phenomenon?
I think it's very easy to understand this. Once you have to deal of freedom of speech, why freedom of speech is so important, because you would like to listen to the different opinions, the opinion which totally against your opinion. But today we see what is happening in the West mostly, trying to canceling the difference of the voice. The voice can be ridiculous, but they have perfect rights to defend their own voice. And if you have any sense of freedom of expression, you have to defend the rights who has different opinions from you. So I think today this is kind of danger if you want all the thinking to be unified and to have this political correctness. That can pose a great danger to society.
Of course it does, but we are on this either on the edge of the razor blade or on the slippery slope, because, for example, within a certain range, this seems undeniably true. When we get to the extremes of the range, this seems to be problematic. For example, in Germany, certain ways of speaking about the Holocaust are part of criminal code, that you are not to say certain things and not to deny certain events in the history. But of course, one could come and say, well, this is, everybody's freedom of speech. One could say the Armenian genocide did not happen. So where are we? What do we do then with the freedom of speech?
Well, I think freedom of speech is any opinion can be expressed, and can be wrong and can be totally stupid, but still it can be expressed. I would never think human society can find the absolute truth without comparing an argument, and to make so people would have a chance to make judgments themselves rather than law or lawmakers or authority, government make this judgment. Simply, I just don't trust any judgment without my self challenge. We have to have the rights to be involved, to make mistake, to understand the mistake. And also historical mistakes, we have to understand, what is the mistake? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense if you don't let people discuss those matters.
Yes, well, I wanted to, this is, I find is related. It's related to you earlier mentioning your son and having sons myself, having children myself. I think about this often. I think what I'm about to ask you relates to education, which I think is crucial to to freedom of speech, but also to the discernment and the desire to find out things for yourself. I want to ask you about curiosity, something that you clearly have and have always displayed. Do you think it's a quality that's so innate that it's either there or not? Or do you think curiosity is something that is taught? I ask this question thinking about my students, thinking about my children, and thinking about the world.
Well, I think if you look at cats, I don't know, you have a pets. If you see the pets, then you see how they functioning and the behaviors. Then you see a lot of curiosity there. So certainly it's not being taught. It's basic surviving skill to be curious and to make mistakes, then to learn from the mistakes. But today's education, the danger is trying to feed people with the right, so-called right knowledge. That is the danger. It's like the marketing of millions product, but made by same company. They just wrapped it differently for the old people, for the young people. But basically, this is the absolute danger. The education trying to teach people to become a perfect man, and at the same time to use, if you are a failure and you are not successful, you become lost, and you cannot meet the challenge. So they always trying to scare people, and also to use this kind of, to give you some kind of certain kind of guarantee. If you do that, you'll be rewarded. I think that education from the beginning to the end, for me, is an evil and it's criminal, because it really dismisses very essential meaning about an individual who has the rights to be curious and to make mistakes. And that is the beauty of life. But you see, today we're training so many people to go to better school, to be in better class, and to meet certain kind of task, only become one type of a human being. And a huge majority of so-called successful people are come from that. The government officials, the lawyers, doctors, and all the successful people. You can easily to see their background of what they're thinking. And there's almost nothing can meet any kind of challenge. There's nothing poetic there. So I think that is the biggest human problem today, rather than environmental problem or other refugee problem, because we all become a refugee of our own knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. I want to pass on a question in this forum. And we just discussed freedom of speech. It's not necessarily a position I agree with, but the question is there, and I think it deserves being passed on to you. Thomas Gommel asks, in times of COVID-19, The rule applies to many events, concerts, and exhibitions that unvaccinated people are not allowed access. The Volksbank in Germany even advertises with the slogan, "We are vaccinating our way free." Even if it could prove that the vaccination is helpful for everyone, the exclusion of a group of people from public coexistence seems to be unacceptable. Access to art cannot be denied, and in a closed or segmented society, art can't work. A bizarre example is a performance of John Cage's piece 433 in front of a vaccinated audience while the unvaccinated are left out. It seems to be absurd. Hence the question, what strategies are available to artists, actors, and musicians, but also to galleries, museums, theaters, concert halls, to overcome this stigmatization? If there are no strategies in the art business, should the artists go underground, like Marcel Duchamp? This is the question from Thomas Gommel.
God, this is a big disaster question, and it's first we as long as we think we are part of a society, then we have some kind of obligation. That not obligation, not necessarily what we believes or we think that should be, but we are part of a society. So that's you can see that's the deal. It's almost like a business, but not necessarily every deal is a right deal. I don't think government has any rights, absolutely have any rights to tell people what to do. Unless you think those people belongs to you as slaves or someone you can really play with. So I don't know. One occasion I heard Putin, the Russian president, said maybe it's not true or true, but one occasion he said anybody doesn't want to be vaccinated, but doesn't have to. So I kind of feel right about this dictator even have this common sense, to let people decide their own business, and that business include about the danger, about the life and death, and about even to be ashamed of, but still that's his body. So I'm vaccinated, and but I certainly understand that anybody doesn't want to be and should not be discriminated.
Yes, this is obviously a very fraught question at a very difficult moment, and I think we can all think of many counter arguments, particularly in this vaccination process. I think one issue to raise possibly is that with the breadth of activity, of human activity, human knowledge, of the head-spinning technological, medical advances, and so on and so forth, I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to be a good judge on so many topics. And I think this is one of the problems that our society faces, because we are not qualified epidemiologists, we're not qualified biologists, we are not qualified space engineers, and in that sense, I think there would be a tendency to outsource some of the decision making, because we are simply no longer able to quite process all the knowledge that's necessary to come to some conclusions. And this is where danger comes in, because then we're very much prone to influence.
Yeah, the society lost a very fundamental moral trust. So you cannot trust the engineers or even professionals who make billions from the pandemic, and it just simply you cannot trust it, because there's always profit, and we're
there's a
living.
good counter argument coming from Stuart Isaacoff, a writer who doesn't mince words. So his comment is, so do we all have the right to infect others? How very stupid in any case. Thank you. This is also a counter argument.
Well, I think that not vaccinated, that means you have rights to affect others. I think that's, you put a very different condition there. You know, let's say if you want to be home alone, you can be unvaccinated. And I think, you know, to say, but to vaccinate everybody is already infected everybody, because the vaccination still, we don't know what is, you know, people make judgment that because they don't trust the vaccination, not because they anything else. And that that benefit of this kind of doubt, I think is understandable. It's not just simply by you know, to simplify it, this moral judgment.
Indeed, David Edwards asks, good evening, Mr. Ai. To prolong Mr. Gerstein's question about the noise of social media, cancel culture, freedom of expression. Of course, I agree with your absolute defense of freedom of expression, but how should we respond to the use of totalitarian regimes that are making social media turn this freedom against the more open societies which defended multiplying the noise of fake news, alternative facts, etc., in order to protect themselves from being held to account, or indeed to actively attack the value systems of freer society. So I think we're back again at this difficulty of processing, because we're all flooded by noise, and it's like a denial of service attack.
I think we should come back to music and art, because simply is almost like beyond reach when you talk about social media and the mass behaving and the government's interests. So I think it's a huge topic. So
yes, I understand. It's like I think, like many other things, if we don't touch it, we do it disservice. But by touching it, and necessarily touching it only superficially, it's a disservice as well. So everything is a disservice.
You can never find the right position in this kind of argument.
No, so perhaps constant shifting and reinvention is indeed what's important. And to that, there was a question from a conductor friend, Donata Cabrera, who asked some time ago in our conversation, in an artist's life, when one breaks from tradition, is that, you think, a conscious moment or a decision? When and how did this happen for you?
For me, even with intention of so-called breaks with the tradition, will never happen, because we are human being and we behaving as a human being. You know, doesn't matter how far we go, we still use our legs and we move, and you know, it's not possible. In the way we understanding meaning, or we're being touched and we have a successful expression, is always need a clear communication there. So the language itself, you cannot just totally create a language. Language is a language because it can be recognized by another person. Otherwise, it's not a language, it's some kind of secret code. So I think to so-called total breakthrough is never happened, and we all can put it into the context of the tradition, and whatever happened will be part of the tradition.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about now looking to the future. You've written this book, and you've told me in private that this is that the afterlife of the publication is like a separate job that's occupying you now with speaking about the book. But what are some of the next projects that you could share with us, or what is your attention turning to, or not yet, or where are you?
I'm still like lost in the woods, and you know, you see a tree is familiar, every possibility every direction you walk seems could be right, could be wrong. So, and also could be indifference because there's a trees after trees, and but you still have to move, right? You cannot just standing there. So for me, it's always lost. You know, I until I can grab something which with my curiosity I can learn something. But now I'm really in the middle of a loss. I hope you can give me some advice, you know, what to do.
Oh, would not dare giving you advice, but
maybe I start to learn piano with you or something like that. But
well,
my
this we
hearing is
discussed
not so good.
that you'll come by in Berlin. But actually, I wanted to ask you. So you've done work in the graphic arts, painting, drawing, sketching, sculpture. You've worked with materials. You've organized projects on a grand scale. So in some way you could say almost art in logistics or logistical art. You've done architecture. Have you done something with music or with sound? And might sound be the next realm for you to explore?
When I was released from detention, the first thing I did is working with my musician friend and to do like a punk rock type of music. I did it because I'm the first person for music. I have a musician friend, many composers, conductors, and soloists. I'm good friend with them. I appreciate what they do, but I never turned on music in my life till today. I have good instrument. I just never really did it. It's so strange, you know. It's not like when I feel hungry, I want to cook a good dish, you know, that I do every day. But I never really feel hungry about the music. This is really a shame. But I do understand music. I'm still directing the opera for Roman, you know, Puccini's Turandot next in the February. But still,
In which opera house?
In Roman opera, Rome Opera House. So I'm totally ashamed when I talk about music. I'm a color, almost like a color blind. I don't like any colors, and I appreciate music. I can judge it's good play or not, and can be totally involved. But I never really have the need to turn on music. So I think those ability are being trained because I see people loves music. Almost everybody I know, they loves music. I used to have a girlfriend who is soloist, piano, not piano, but a violin soloist. I was carrying her like piano, not piano, but violin for her to go to all the rehearsals and performance. You know, I was sitting there. I have a moment of joy, but never really addicted to music.
But your involvement with Turandot is going to be a return to Turandot, no? Because I read in your book that you
exactly.
practically starred in Franco Zeffirelli's production of Turandot at the Metropolitan Opera. Can you recall that? Do you still recall that?
Yeah, I in the 1988, I was 87 or 88. I was you know, desperately to get any job to survive in New York, and then there's a chance Zeffirelli would have a Turandot in Lincoln Center, then he wants to have some person with Oriental face because he's an executioner for the princes. So I went to there and he saw me. He said yes. So I become an assistant of the executioner on stage, and so I make about $3 an hour, and I enjoyed that, and to be on stage with Domingo and Eva Matan, all those singers. But I forget about that experience because I think that only performed like 12 times or something like that. But till very recent years, there's director come to me to say, why don't you direct the opera? I don't really know what's the reason they can choose me, because I always clearly tell people I'm a farce person from the musical world. But I asked them which one. They said Turandot. I said, okay, I will do it because this is a strange circle, as an extra.
It's very ironic that you were chosen to be the executioner or assistant executioner in Turandot on the stage of the Met. And are you making some thoughts already on how you want to stage it?
Yeah, the thing is, 2 years ago, right before the pandemic really overwhelmingly taking the Europe, I was in there in March 2000, and that time I was directing for the dressing rehearsal, almost to really give the first presentation. Then it being stopped because Italy is the first state have a huge pandemic problem. So now I have to redo it, and it's fun, So.
And who is conducting it?
It's a conductor from, I think, from Argentina, a young conductor.
Wonderful.
From South America. Yeah.
Sure, we'll all look for that, and hopefully it's streamed or broadcast somehow. So those that cannot get to Rome will be able to see it. When is the premiere? When is the opening?
Premiere would be March 20th. It's quite fragile, but still they decide to do it because it's very difficult for the opera house even to book a good singer for this kind of opera. So.
Absolutely. Well, but so it's not at all an advice, but it would be very interesting to, with all the things that you describe, with your relationship to music and with your relationship to sound, to experience a work of yours that explores sound, and even your lack of hunger for it, or your, as you said, equivalency of color blindness, because I think that
it can only prove how wrong the sense can be. It just I always have to think of the other possibilities, how wrong one thing can be to let me to be as a director of opera. So.
Yes, and just for a second, jumping to your childhood, was there music in your childhood? Do you remember that as a
absolutely silent? Only remembers a revolutionary sound, which they would all German mouth language into a so-called music, and it's crazy. It's so bad, and but you have to memorize it. So it destroys my whole feeling about appreciation.
Yes, and then maybe a final question. And you've been so generous with your time, and our participants are also so wonderfully engaged through this rather long span of time, especially for online. But so you said Mao's regime so used music and in fact this occupation with what artists do, what writers do, and subverting it, let's say, for purposes of politics, of power consolidation. And this we have seen, of course, many times throughout history and throughout 20th century history. This appropriation and subversion of art for the purpose of politics or for business purposes. Is there something that art and artists can do to prevent that? Because it seems artists with very, very best intentions have so often ended up being sort of a beautiful postcard of a terrible regime.
I think we have to think art benefits individual, our soul and our emotion and our judgment. I think that is ultimate meaning of, because it is ultimate, it benefit our soul, and doesn't matter what kind of region or what kind of condition we are in. We have nothing else which can have this kind of temperature and warmth and this kind of human feelings in relate to the unknown deep emotions we have. It always creates something, creates a humanity. So we have to, that's why we have to trust ourselves and trust what art can help us, not to become completely a cold piece, which just seeking for power and profit. So I think it's about caring, it's about sharing, it's about understanding.
Well, absolutely. As they say here, I think you spread and embody many ideals of what being an artist is, and you keep reinventing and challenging yourself and challenging us, and I find that very inspiring, and for that I think we can all be grateful to you as an artist, and we can be all grateful to this function of being a human that that art brings us, that art inspires us to seek and hopefully find, and that's a perilous and individual journey, but presences such as yourself, I think, help us. So I want to thank you for being that inspiration for so many, and I look forward to seeing what next works come from your creativity.
Thank you so much to give me this time. I'm very humbled on that because you have a highly intellect program which not just focus on aesthetics but about everything. So I fully appreciated the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope we will see each other soon. And I want to thank all our participants and for all the questions and for your attention. And so we continue onwards in this new year, and we'll see what it brings. But thank you so much, Weiwei.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Good
Bye-bye.
night. Bye-bye.
Bye.